The Holy Gospel according to St. Mark, the 6th chapter. Glory to you, O Lord. Jesus left that place and came to his hometown, and his disciples followed him. On the Sabbath, he began to teach in the synagogue, and many who heard him were astounded. They said, "Where did this man get all this? What is this wisdom that has been given to him? What deeds of power are being done by his hands? Is not this the carpenter, the son of Mary, and the brother of James and Joses and Judas and Simon? And are not his sisters here with us?" And they took offense at him. Then Jesus said to them, "Prophets are not without honor, except in their hometown, and among their own kin, and in their own house." And he could do no deed of power there, except that he laid his hands on a few sick people and cured them. And he was amazed at their unbelief. Then he went about among the villages teaching. He called the 12 and began to send them out 2 by 2, and gave them authority over the unclean spirits. He ordered them to take nothing for their journey except a staff, no bread, no bag, no money in their belts, but to wear sandals, and not to put on 2 tunics. He said to them, "Whenever you enter a house, stay there until you leave that place. If any place will not welcome you, and they refuse to hear you, as you leave, shake off the dust that is on your feet as a testimony against them." So they went out and proclaimed that all should repent. They cast out many demons and anointed with oil many who were sick and cured them. The Gospel of the Lord. Well, for many of us, packing light is a really hard thing to do. And I have been struggling for years with figuring out how to pack lighter on my trips, because I look at all the stuff that I think I'm going to pack, and I cannot imagine how it is that I could possibly go on a trip without any of this stuff that I have that I so often want to bring along. I am sure that packing light was hard for those first disciples also. And so it must have been totally inconceivable how Jesus could tell them to go on a journey without bringing such basic things as money and food and a change of clothing. It was probably also kind of inconceivable even to the gospel writers who wrote this story down decades later. And I think it was probably inconceivable for them because the lists of what Jesus told them to bring and not bring are different with all 3 of the synoptic gospel writers. So in Mark's gospel, the disciples are told to wear sandals and to bring their staff. In Luke's gospel, they're told to bring a staff. Sandals aren't mentioned, so presumably they're allowed to bring those. And in Matthew's gospel, they're told not to bring a staff or sandals. They're not even allowed to wear shoes. It was weird. It was bizarre, all of this packing light stuff. But as I was reading this story again, it started to occur to me that Jesus wasn't just telling them to go on this journey without a lot of physical stuff along with him. Instead, I think he was also trying to tell them to not pack along and bring a whole bunch of unrealistic expectations. Because those first disciples had been with Jesus when he did some pretty amazing things. And he had begun to achieve a lot of fame. Many people were saying all kinds of great things about him. But see, then Jesus went home in today's gospel reading, and he started to teach in his home synagogue and talked to people who had known him since he was a little kid. And apparently, things did not go so well. Everybody there knew Jesus, and they knew what he had done elsewhere, and they were probably very happy about the fact that he was bringing fame and a good name to his hometown, especially since his hometown was Nazareth. And you may recall that elsewhere in the New Testament, Nazareth is the butt of jokes. The first time that Nathanael hears about Jesus, he goes, "Can anything good come out of Nazareth?" It's a pretty scummy little town back then. And so the people were probably pretty happy that there was some fame and some respect coming to Nazareth. But then they got offended when Jesus does not mind his place in the family system of the town. He assumed the role of teacher and prophet and healer sent by God. And the people did not like it. "Be a great religious leader out there someplace, Jesus," they said, "but don't come around here, too big for your britches, and start telling us what we should think and feel and do." in the end, the folks in Nazareth did not speak well of Jesus. Essentially, what they said to him is, "Who do you think you are? I mean, some of us sitting here in the synagogue, we helped change your diapers. And now you come back, you start telling us what to think." They were not at all saying nice things about him. The folks in Nazareth did not want what Jesus had to offer. I mean, they knew of all these great deeds of power he had done elsewhere, but Mark says he could do no deed of power there, not because Jesus was suddenly incapacitated, like there was some piece of, kryptonite that was there that suddenly robbed him of his power. The reason he couldn't do a deed of power there is people weren't willing to receive it. They didn't want it. It's as if he walked in and said, "Here's a great gift from God," and they said, "No thanks, not from you." They wouldn't take it. The people in Nazareth did not, in the end, find Jesus' fame and reputation to be all that particularly impressive. And they were just as happy when Jesus took off and left for other villages. So right on the heels of this story in which Jesus is rejected by people in his own hometown and ignored by people whom you'd think would be receptive to what Jesus had to offer, Jesus sends his disciples out into the nearby villages. He gives them the authority, the same authority that he had, this authority over demons, and at the same time, he also tells them implicitly to expect the kind of reception that he's received. And sometimes, of course, that reception was going to be really great. But Jesus specifically tells them what they should do when they get a reception similar to that which he got in Nazareth. This, shake the dust of your feet off as you leave the town. And in so doing, Jesus is also calling his disciples to travel light, not just by not taking stuff along, but by not taking along these expectations that being faithful and doing what he asked them to do is going to make them famous and popular and cause people to speak well of them. So the disciples went out, and Mark says they proclaimed that all should repent. Did you notice that Mark doesn't report that a single person repented? He says they went out, they proclaimed that all should repent, and they cast out demons and healed some people. Would have been easy for Mark to say they went out, they told everybody to repent, and lots of people repented, and also they healed people, but that's not what happened. So probably what happened was the disciples in general got the same reception and reaction that Jesus did. Whole bunches of people were happy to let them heal them and things like that, but maybe not to listen to them and take what they had to say to heart or do anything different. Seems, though, that the disciples were not discouraged by this or by the reaction that Jesus got in Nazareth. They had lightened the load by ditching their unrealistic expectations. They did not expect that everybody would be happy to receive them. They didn't expect that everybody would listen to them, and they had no expectation that everybody would suddenly change and start doing things that God called them to do. And because they were able to ditch those unrealistic expectations, they were free to simply be faithful to what Jesus called them to do. To go on that journey, living faithfully, doing what Jesus asked them without any kind of holding back because they were feeling that somehow or other this was supposed to change the world in some big way. And more, I think that's an important thing for us to remember as well. Jesus calls us also to lighten our loads by not packing along so many preconceived notions about what being a follower of Jesus is supposed to be all about, either as individual believers or as a faith community, as the church. And it often seems to me that what can drag us down as Christians and make it hard for people to be able to joyfully, kind of just faithfully serve Jesus in the world are a bunch of unrealistic expectations. Expectations that doing what Jesus calls us to do will somehow make people speak well of us. We go out into the world and told, well, go and share God's love with people. Be kind to people. Tell people about God. Live your life as a kind of person that would be like Jesus meeting these people. it's great to love God and serve the church and serve others in God with God's love, and that's supposed to make people say, oh, what wonderful, nice people you are. We really appreciate all that stuff. And sometimes that happens, but a lot of times it just makes us look weird and odd. And people say, you know, it's good that you guys put God first, because God should be first unless there's something else going on, and then you should put God 3 or 4 because it gets in the way of your real life. And that often just makes you look weird. It made it look weird to the disciples as well. Sometimes what drags us down is a group of people that are trying to do the will of God in the world and live as Jesus calls us to live is the unrealistic expectation that we're going to change people's mind about all kinds of stuff. Somehow we think if we can just tell people about the real love of God, because we read on Facebook posts and the internet all these people that are saying that, you know, really what Christianity is about is how you're going to hell if you don't believe this and you don't do this and all this other kind of stuff. But if we would just be able to tell people, here's what God's love is really all about. Here's what the relationship of Jesus is really supposed to do in people's lives, that people would go, oh, if that's what it's really all about, okay, I want to fill the church again. And we think that somehow or other our faithfulness is going to kind of win over huge numbers of people. And sometimes it does really have an effect and a healing help for a lot of people who have not really heard and experienced God's love. But that doesn't happen all the time. In fact, it probably doesn't happen a majority of the time, and it didn't for the disciples either. And sometimes what keeps us down as a community of Christians is the unrealistic expectation that if we would just kind of be faithful in the right ways and do the right things, as a community, as the church, we would finally somehow be popular and successful again. Lots of people kind of, when you read stuff on the internet, things like that, conservative commentators especially are like, you know, we got to get back to where everybody's you know, living morally the way we're supposed to, then the church would be in the center of the life of the world again. But I notice also that everybody can play this game. And I was reading a very liberal commentator the other day who was saying, you know, one of the problems about churches in general, and I think she's actually right about some of this, she said, you know, we haven't focused enough on building relationships with each other and helping people have a relationship with God. We haven't focused enough on caring for the poor and those who are needy. And if we did those things, she says, finally then the church would be worthy of its position in society. And I thought, she probably doesn't even realize she's doing this, but it's the same expectation that the church, the Christian community, is supposed to be, you know, in the center of society. It's supposed to have a place of honor. Because we represent God, you know? And it's that expectation that somehow we're supposed to be famous and spoken well of, the way we think Jesus was. But you know what? For Jesus and for the disciples, it wasn't that way even from the beginning. Jesus' call to us, just as his call to the first disciples was, is simply to be faithful, to speak and to act and to journey on in life as messengers and as companions of Jesus. And if there are any expectations that we're supposed to pack along and bring with us, it's these. We should expect that God will work through our faithfulness, even if that work happens in small ways that we don't expect. Because you notice that people were still experiencing healing, even at times when there was no great deed of power. We should expect that God notices our faithfulness, even when nobody else does, and even when we're criticized for it. And maybe most of all, we should expect that in the end, the success of our faithful journey finally depends on God's power and on God's faithfulness, not on our own.